There are stories that kingdoms proudly carve into stone, and then there are stories they quietly whisper beside fading fires long after the last crown has turned to dust. This is one of those stories. It began on a cold autumn evening when the poorest girl in Alderwyn gave away the only meal she owned. There was no audience to praise her kindness. No promise of reward waited beyond the falling night. There was only an empty stomach, a tired heart, and a starving wolf lying beneath an ancient tree. The wolf accepted her final piece of bread without a sound. Then he looked into her eyes as though he had recognized someone he had been searching for across centuries. Before sunrise, he disappeared into the endless darkness of the whispering forest. When dawn finally reached the valleys, royal horns echoed across every village. The guardian wolf of the kingdom had vanished. The king's soldiers searched every road. The nobles blamed one another. The forests grew strangely silent. And somewhere among thousands of frightened people, they began searching for a poor young woman who had never before mattered to anyone. No one understood why. Least of all, Elara. Far beyond Alderwyn's stone castles and bustling marketplaces stood a forgotten village where winter always seemed to arrive earlier than everywhere else. The cottages leaned against one another as though they were too tired to remain standing alone. Their wooden roofs carried years of patched repairs, while thin streams of smoke drifted into skies that rarely stayed blue for long. Life there was never easy. The earth gave little. The forests demanded respect. The mountains watched without mercy. Yet among those weathered homes lived a young woman whose kindness had somehow survived every hardship life had placed before her. Her name was Elara. She lived alone in a tiny cottage tucked against the edge of whispering forest. The house had once belonged to her parents. Its walls still carried tiny carvings her father had etched beside the doorway to mark every passing season. Wildflowers still bloomed beneath the windows because her mother had planted them years ago, believing beauty should exist even where poverty did. Both were gone now. A cruel winter fever had taken them within the same month. The village mourned them briefly. Then life moved forward, as life always does. Only Elara remained behind to remember. Each morning before sunrise, she stepped outside carrying a woven basket across one shoulder. The morning air smelled of damp pine needles and cold earth. Tiny drops of dew rested upon every blade of grass, sparkling whenever the first rays of sunlight slipped through the towering trees. She knew every narrow path through whispering forest. She knew where healing herbs grew beneath fallen logs. She knew which berries birds refused to eat. She knew where streams remained unfrozen even during the harshest winters. The forest had become her teacher after the world had taken everything else away. When she returned to the village each afternoon, she never kept everything she gathered. Old Martha, whose hands shook too badly to sew anymore, always found fresh herbs hanging beside her door. The blacksmith's youngest son often discovered apples left quietly on his windowsill after poor harvests. Widower Edwin never admitted someone secretly repaired his torn blankets every autumn. Everyone accepted these quiet gifts. Few ever thanked the person who left them. Elara never expected gratitude. Helping others had become as natural as breathing, even when breathing itself sometimes hurt from the cold. That autumn proved especially unforgiving. Rain came when crops needed sunlight. Frost arrived weeks too early. The fields surrounding the village turned pale long before harvest should have ended. One evening, merchants announced that flour prices would double before winter. Families returned home carrying less food than they had hoped. Children learned not to ask for second portions. Elara counted the few coins hidden inside a clay jar beneath her bed. There were barely enough to buy another loaf of bread. She smiled anyway. Not because life had become easier. Because she had learned long ago that bitterness never warmed an empty house. The following morning she accepted extra sewing work from a traveling merchant whose cloak had been torn by mountain thorns. By sunset, her fingers were sore from stitching thick wool. The merchant paid her with a single small loaf of bread instead of silver. She accepted it with genuine gratitude. Fresh bread had become a rare luxury. The warm scent filled her cottage while evening winds rattled the old shutters. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to imagine a full meal. Outside, the sky slowly changed. Golden sunlight disappeared behind distant mountains. Clouds rolled across the horizon like slow-moving waves. The wind carried a strange silence. Even the birds stopped singing earlier than usual. Villagers noticed it too. Doors closed sooner. Lanterns were lit before darkness fully arrived. An old shepherd crossed himself as he hurried home. "The forest feels wrong tonight," he whispered to no one in particular. No one argued. Everyone simply stayed inside. Everyone except Elara. She wrapped a faded wool cloak around her shoulders and picked up her basket. There were medicinal roots she had promised to gather for old Martha before the first frost hardened the ground. Promises mattered. Especially to people who had little else. She walked toward Whispering Forest while the last light slipped between the ancient pines. The towering trees welcomed her with familiar shadows. Dry leaves crunched softly beneath her boots. A cool breeze drifted through the branches overhead, carrying the rich scent of moss, cedar, and damp bark. Normally the forest hummed with quiet life. Owls called to one another. Foxes darted between ferns. Small creatures rustled beneath fallen leaves. Tonight, nothing. The silence stretched so deeply that even her own footsteps sounded unfamiliar. She paused. Something wasn't right. Far ahead, several ravens suddenly burst into the sky. They circled only once before disappearing west. Then came another sound. Barely louder than the wind. A slow, painful breath. Elara tightened her grip on the lantern. Its warm light danced across thick tree trunks as she carefully followed the sound. Step after cautious step. The breathing grew heavier. Then she reached an enormous oak unlike any other in the forest. Its twisted roots rose from the earth like the fingers of an ancient giant. Beneath its branches lay a wolf. Not an ordinary wolf. He was enormous. Even lying upon the ground, his body looked larger than any hunting horse she had ever seen. His silver-grey fur, though beautiful, had lost its healthy shine. His sides rose and fell unevenly. Every breath seemed to cost him strength. His ribs showed beneath his coat. One ear twitched weakly as she approached. The stories flooded back into her mind. Never approach a wounded wolf. Especially one that walks alone. Especially inside Whispering Forest. Yet something stopped her from running. It wasn't courage. It was the way he looked at her. His golden eyes held no hunger. No fury. No wild madness. Only exhaustion. And something deeper. Something almost unbearably lonely. The wolf tried to stand. His front legs trembled violently. After only a single step, they folded beneath him once again. A quiet whine escaped his throat before he lowered his head onto the cold earth. Elara remained perfectly still. Her heartbeat echoed inside her ears. The lantern flickered between them. For several long moments, neither moved. Then she slowly reached into her basket. Inside rested the loaf of bread she had worked all day to earn. She stared at it. Her stomach tightened painfully. It was everything she had. Tomorrow offered no guarantee of food. Winter waited only weeks away. No one would blame her for walking away. No one would even know. The wolf watched silently. Elara knelt. Breaking the loaf in half, she hesitated only a heartbeat before gently placing every piece upon a flat stone a short distance away. "I'm sorry," she whispered softly. "I don't have meat." The wolf lifted his head. Slowly, carefully, he crawled forward. He never growled. Never bared his teeth. He simply reached the bread and ate each piece with slow, deliberate movements, as though savoring not only the food but the kindness behind it. When the final crumb disappeared, he stopped. Instead of leaving, he looked directly into Elara's eyes. Time itself seemed to stand still. The wind faded. The trees became silent. His golden gaze felt impossibly old. Not the eyes of an animal. The eyes of someone carrying centuries of memories. Someone silently offering gratitude that words could never express. Then something impossible happened. The wolf slowly lowered his massive head. Not in weakness. Not in exhaustion. But in respect. A single breath escaped Elara's lips. The lantern flame flickered. Before she could move, the wolf rose once more. This time his legs held steady. Without looking back again, he disappeared between the ancient pines. His enormous shape melted into darkness so completely that it almost seemed the forest itself had swallowed him whole. Elara hurried after him. Only empty trees greeted her. The wolf was gone. All that remained were enormous paw prints pressed deeply into the damp earth. She followed them for nearly 50 yards. Then, they simply ended. No turning. No leap. No rocky ground to hide them. One print. Then another. And then nothing. Only untouched leaves beneath the silent trees. A chill slowly climbed her spine. She stood alone beneath the ancient oak as darkness settled over whispering forest. Somewhere far away, a single wolf howled. Then another answered. And another. Until the mountains themselves seemed to awaken. The chorus of howls followed Elara all the way back to her little cottage. They did not sound like the cries of hungry predators chasing prey. They rose and fell with strange purpose, echoing across the valleys like voices calling to one another through the night. Sometimes they seemed close enough that she expected glowing eyes to appear between the trees. Moments later they drifted toward the distant mountains until they became part of the cold autumn wind. She reached home well after moonrise. The lantern hanging beside her door had long since burned out, leaving the cottage wrapped in darkness. She pushed the wooden door open, stepped inside, and leaned against it for a long moment. The room felt emptier than ever. A small stone fireplace waited silently in one corner. A rough wooden table stood beneath the only window. Beside it rested the empty basket that should have carried her supper home. Instead, only a few crumbs remained where the loaf had once been. Her stomach growled softly. She smiled despite herself. It was only bread, she whispered into the quiet room. Yet deep inside, she knew it had been more than that. She could still see those golden eyes. Still feel the strange silence that had surrounded the ancient oak. Still wonder why a creature so powerful had looked so tired. She lit a single candle and warmed a pot of herb tea over the fire. The bitter leaves did little to satisfy her hunger, but they filled the cottage with the comforting scent of mint and pine. Outside, the wind continued to sing through the forest. Sleep refused to come easily. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw the enormous wolf lowering his head before her. Not like a beast. Like a king. The first light of dawn had barely touched the rooftops when a thunder of hooves shattered the village's usual morning silence. People rushed from their cottages. Children clung to their mothers. Farmers abandoned their tools where they stood. Dust rolled along the narrow road as 6 royal horsemen galloped into the village wearing deep blue cloaks marked with the silver crest of Alderwyn. At their head rode Captain Rowan, one of the king's oldest commanders. His weathered face looked grimmer than anyone remembered. He pulled his horse to a stop beside the village square. Without another word, one of the soldiers raised a great bronze horn. Its mournful call rolled across the valley. Once. Twice. 3 times. Even the birds stopped singing. Captain Rowan unrolled a scroll sealed with dark green wax. His voice carried across every roof. By order of His Majesty King Aldrin of Alderwyn. The villagers lowered their heads. The sacred guardian of the kingdom has disappeared. A ripple of frightened whispers spread through the crowd. Captain Rowan continued. For over 500 years, the guardian wolf has protected the ancient seal beneath Frostcrown Mountain. His voice grew heavier. Before sunrise, the guardian vanished. Gasps escaped the villagers. Old men crossed themselves. Women pulled frightened children closer. The captain's gaze swept over the crowd. Every road will be searched. Every forest explored. No traveler shall pass unnoticed. Anyone withholding information will answer before the crown. Silence followed. Then someone spoke in a trembling voice. If the guardian is truly gone. Another finished the sentence. Then the old stories are true. No one laughed. Everyone knew those stories. Every child in Alderwyn grew up hearing them. Long before the kingdom existed, an endless darkness had tried to swallow the world. Not an army. Not a monster. Something older. Something without mercy. According to legend, the first guardian wolf had given his own life force to imprison that darkness beneath Frostcrown Mountain. Each generation afterward, another guardian inherited that sacred duty. As long as the guardian lived. The seal endured. But if the guardian disappeared, winter itself would no longer be the kingdom's greatest fear. Captain Rowan rolled the scroll shut. Remain vigilant. Travel only when necessary. If wolves approach your homes. He hesitated. Do not provoke them. Those words unsettled the villagers more than anything else. Never before had the crown warned people not to challenge wolves. The soldiers turned their horses. Within moments they disappeared down the road toward the next village. Behind them they left only silence. And fear. The marketplace never truly recovered that day. Normally laughter drifted between vegetable stalls. Children chased chickens through muddy lanes. Merchants argued cheerfully over prices. Now every conversation became a whisper. They say the guardian is larger than any horse. My grandfather claimed his eyes glowed like fire. No. They say he chooses who lives and who dies. Others spoke even more quietly. What if someone killed him? What if someone angered him? What if he abandoned us? The questions multiplied faster than answers. Elara kept her head lowered while purchasing a handful of oats with her last few coins. She wished only to return home unnoticed. Instead, old Brenna stepped into her path. You came through Whispering Forest yesterday, didn't you? Several nearby villagers immediately looked toward Elara. I often do, she answered gently. Brenna frowned. Did you see anything? Elara hesitated. The image of the starving wolf flashed through her mind. His trembling legs. His empty eyes. The loaf of bread. She almost spoke. Then something inside warned her to remain silent. I saw only the forest. It wasn't entirely true. Yet somehow, it felt necessary. Brenna studied her for another moment before nodding slowly. Stay away from those woods. The wolves won't be themselves now. Elara quietly continued home. That evening the sky turned silver beneath heavy clouds. Rain threatened but never came. As she reached her cottage, something unusual caught her eye. Resting perfectly in the center of her doorstep lay a feather. Not gray. Not white. Silver. Its surface shimmered softly despite the fading light. She bent down. The feather felt warm. Almost impossibly warm. No ordinary bird possessed feathers like this. She turned it gently between her fingers. The silver glow faded almost immediately. Within seconds it looked perfectly ordinary again. She searched the clearing surrounding her cottage. Nothing. No footprints. No birds. No movement among the trees. Only silence. She carried the feather inside. Unsure why. She placed it beside the small wooden carving of her parents that rested upon the mantel. The following morning, another feather appeared. This one rested upon the windowsill. The day after, a third waited beside the garden gate. Always silver. Always warm. Always arriving before sunrise. She stopped trying to understand them. Instead, she carefully collected each one inside a small wooden box. Days passed. Then weeks. Autumn slowly surrendered to early winter. The nights grew colder. Thin sheets of ice covered quiet ponds before dawn. Smoke rose constantly from village chimneys. Yet something else had begun to change. The wolves. Travelers returning from distant towns spoke of entire packs appearing upon snowy hillsides. Not hunting. Watching. Standing perfectly still. No livestock disappeared. No shepherds were attacked. It was as though every wolf in Alderwyn waited for something unseen. One afternoon Elara noticed them herself. She had climbed a grassy ridge searching for winter herbs. Far across the valley, 3 wolves stood together upon a rocky cliff. Their thick coats moved gently in the wind. They faced her. None approached. None threatened. For several quiet moments they simply watched. Then, almost together, each lowered its head. The same gesture. The same silent respect. Before she could take another breath, they turned and disappeared into the forest. Elara remained frozen where she stood. A strange warmth settled inside her chest. Not comfort. Recognition. As though invisible threads had begun connecting her life to theirs. Threads she could neither see nor break. Far away, behind the towering walls of Alderwyn Castle, another pair of eyes watched the kingdom with very different thoughts. Lord Garrick stood alone upon the western battlements. The wind whipped his crimson cloak against polished black armor. Below him stretched the capital city. Thousands of homes. Thousands of lives. All waiting for leadership. He smiled. It was a cold smile. The kind that never reached the eyes. Beside him stood a younger officer. "The searches continue, my lord." No sign of the Guardian. Garrick looked toward the snow-covered outline of Frostcrown Mountain. "Good." The officer hesitated. "Good, my lord." Garrick rested both hands upon the stone wall. "For 5 centuries. The people have loved a wolf more than their own rulers. They obey the crown. But they trust the Guardian." His fingers slowly tightened. "As long as that beast exists, the throne will never hold absolute power." The officer shifted uneasily. "My lord, if the ancient stories are true." Garrick interrupted him without turning. "Stories. Nothing more. But people are ruled by what they fear." He finally faced the young officer. "If the Guardian never returns, they will beg for someone strong enough to save them." A slow smile appeared once more. "And I intend to be that man." That same night, far above the kingdom, deep within snow-covered cliffs where no human had walked for generations, a massive grey wolf climbed alone through a narrow mountain pass. His movements remained slow. His body still carried weakness. Yet each step seemed stronger than the last. The moonlight painted silver across his thick fur. He stopped upon an ancient stone ledge overlooking the entire kingdom. Villages glowed like scattered stars beneath the darkness. The old wolf closed his golden eyes. The wind carried one scent above all others. Bread, wild herbs, pine smoke, and the quiet kindness of the young woman who had expected nothing in return. For the first time in countless years, the immortal Guardian felt hope. But far beneath Frostcrown Mountain, hidden beneath layers of ancient stone, something else awakened. A crack spread silently across the forgotten seal. From within its darkness, 2 crimson eyes slowly opened. The first snow arrived before the leaves had completely fallen. It drifted softly over Alderwyn through the silent hours before dawn, covering fields, rooftops, and forest trails beneath a blanket of untouched white. By sunrise, the kingdom looked almost peaceful, as though winter had gently erased every worry whispered during the long autumn. But peace had become an illusion. Fear still lingered beneath the snow. Every traveler carried another rumor. Some claimed they had seen enormous wolves standing upon frozen lakes beneath the moon. Others swore the Guardian had abandoned mankind forever. The oldest storytellers spoke in hushed voices of dark winters from centuries past, when villages disappeared beneath endless storms and people vanished without leaving footprints behind. Each story made the next one darker. Each day made the kingdom more afraid. Life inside her little cottage continued much as it always had. Elara swept fresh snow away from the front steps before sunrise. She gathered firewood from the edge of the forest. She repaired worn blankets for neighbors who had little to offer except warm smiles and quiet gratitude. Yet something had changed. She no longer felt alone. Not because anyone visited, but because she always sensed unseen eyes watching from beyond the trees. They never frightened her. Sometimes, while carrying water from the nearby stream, she would glance toward the forest and catch the faint outline of grey fur disappearing between the pines. Other mornings she found strange gifts waiting outside her cottage. A rabbit left untouched upon the snow. Fresh herbs impossible to find during winter. Bundles of dry firewood stacked neatly beside her door. No footprints surrounded them. Only enormous wolf tracks leading back toward Whispering Forest. She understood without anyone telling her. The wolves were caring for her. In the only way they knew how. She never took more than she needed. Whenever she accepted one gift, she quietly left another beside the forest. Fresh water. Pieces of bread. Bundles of healing herbs. The exchange became an unspoken tradition. No words. No promises. Only trust. One grey afternoon the sky darkened much earlier than usual. Heavy clouds rolled over the mountains, swallowing the sun before evening had even begun. Elara wrapped herself in her thick wool cloak and set out toward the village. Old Martha had developed a cough, and fresh pine resin mixed with mountain herbs might ease her breathing. The roads had grown slippery beneath fresh snow. Each step crunched softly beneath her boots. The cold bit at her cheeks until they glowed pink. She had nearly reached the edge of the village when she noticed something unusual. Horse tracks. Many of them. Fresh. Far too many for merchants. Her heart quickened. The tracks led directly toward her cottage. She hurried. As she climbed the final hill, her breath caught. Royal soldiers surrounded the little house. Nearly 20 of them. Blue cloaks fluttered in the freezing wind. Several horses stood tied beside the garden fence. The front door hung open. 2 soldiers carried her small wooden table outside. Another emptied the contents of her cupboards into the snow. Her basket. Her blankets. Her mother's old shawl. Everything lay scattered across the frozen ground. A sharp ache tightened inside her chest. "What are you doing?" she cried. Every head turned. The captain stepped forward. He was broad-shouldered, with frost collecting in his dark beard. "You are Elara?" She nodded slowly. "I am Captain Caelan of the Royal Guard." He studied her carefully. "We have questions." The villagers gathered at a safe distance. None dared interfere. None dared speak. Elara stood in the middle of her own yard while soldiers searched every corner of her home. One young guard emerged carrying the small wooden box. "The feathers, Captain." Caelan opened it. 6 silver feathers rested inside. Even beneath the cloudy sky, they shimmered faintly. His expression hardened. "Where did you find these?" "They appeared." He frowned. "Appeared?" "Outside my home." "When?" "Over the past several days." The captain looked toward his men. Another soldier approached carrying a leather sack. "We found these near the forest trail." Inside lay enormous paw prints pressed into slabs of frozen earth that had been carefully cut from the ground. "Wolf tracks. Huge ones." The captain's eyes narrowed. "These lead directly to your cottage." Elara looked down. She had never even noticed them. The snowfall had hidden most of the older prints. "The wolves came willingly," another guard muttered. "No attack. No struggle." Captain Caelan stepped closer. His voice lowered. "Tell me the truth. Have you seen the guardian wolf?" The cold wind swept across the yard. For a long moment, Elara remained silent. She remembered the starving wolf beneath the ancient oak. His exhausted breathing. His grateful eyes. Something deep inside warned her again. Not out of fear. Out of trust. "I've seen wolves," she answered carefully. "But I do not know your guardian." Several soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. The captain's jaw tightened. "I believe you know far more than you admit." "I don't." "You live alone." "Yes." "The wolves visit only your home." "I never invited them." "The feathers." "I cannot explain them." His patience disappeared. "You will explain them before the king." 2 soldiers stepped forward. Cold iron shackles closed around Elara's wrists. The sound echoed far louder than it should have. The villagers watched silently. Old Martha wiped tears from her eyes. The blacksmith lowered his head in shame. No one dared challenge royal authority. Elara looked once toward her little cottage. Its door still stood open. Snow drifted inside. The fire she had carefully built that morning slowly died. Everything she had left of her parents remained behind. She wondered if she would ever return. The prison wagon creaked slowly along the frozen road toward the capital. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the gray afternoon. The wooden wheels groaned over icy stones. Inside the iron cage, Elara wrapped her cloak tightly around herself. The cold seeped through every board beneath her feet. Captain Caelan rode several yards ahead. The guards spoke little. Even they seemed uneasy. The deeper they traveled into the northern valleys, the quieter the world became. No birds. No deer. No rabbits crossing the snow. Only endless forests standing beneath pale skies. Then, one of the horses snorted nervously. Another refused to move. The soldiers immediately reached for their swords. Captain Caelan raised one hand. Hold. Silence. Then movement. Far above them, upon a rocky ridge, a wolf appeared. Massive. Grey. Perfectly still. Another stepped from behind a pine tree. Then another. Within moments, more than 20 wolves stood watching the narrow mountain road. None growled. None bared their teeth. They simply watched the wagon. Watching. Elara. A young guard swallowed hard. They're surrounding us. Captain Caelan slowly looked across the hills. They're keeping pace. As the wagon continued forward, so did the wolves. Always the same distance away. Never attacking. Never leaving. Hour after hour. Like silent guardians escorting someone precious through dangerous lands. One frightened soldier whispered, "They're protecting the prisoner." No one answered. Because everyone had begun to realize the same impossible truth. News traveled faster than the prison wagon. By the time Elara reached Alderwyn Castle, rumors had already spread through every corridor. The wolves follow her. They bow their heads. They won't let anyone harm her. Some called her a witch. Others claimed she carried an ancient blessing. The servants crossed themselves whenever she passed. The guards tightened their grip on their spears. Only one man smiled. Lord Garrick. He stood beside one of the castle's tall windows as the wagon entered the courtyard below. "So," he murmured softly, "the wolves have chosen their little secret." His reflection smiled back at him. Perfect. Deep within the oldest wing of Alderwyn Castle, where thick stone walls had survived hundreds of winters, another discovery unfolded. Queen Evelyn's oldest scholar, Master Cedric, carefully brushed centuries of dust from a forgotten leather-bound manuscript. Its pages had become brittle with age. The ink had nearly faded away. Yet one illustration remained remarkably clear. A great wolf stood beside a young woman dressed in plain clothing. Neither wore a crown. Neither carried a weapon. Above them shone a single silver feather. Cedric adjusted his spectacles. His heartbeat quickened. He slowly read the ancient words written beneath the drawing. "When the guardian grows weak, he shall not seek the mighty. He shall not seek kings. He shall not seek warriors. He shall find the one whose heart gives freely when no reward is promised. Only through such compassion shall the ancient bond awaken once more." Cedric's hands trembled. He turned another page. Then another. Every line confirmed the impossible. The Guardian never chose rulers. Never chose nobles. Never chose heroes celebrated by history. He chose kindness. Always kindness. Cedric closed the ancient book. Outside, a single, haunting howl echoed across the frozen mountains. Then another answered. Then dozens more. The sound rolled across the kingdom like distant thunder. Every wolf in Alderwyn lifted its voice to the winter sky. Inside the castle courtyard, every horse reared in panic. Every soldier froze. And inside her prison cell, Elara slowly lifted her eyes. Somewhere beyond those stone walls, she felt that familiar presence again. Not calling her, waiting for her. And far beneath Frostcrown Mountain, another crack spread through the ancient seal. This time, something in the darkness smiled. Night settled over Alderwyn Castle like a heavy cloak. Snow drifted quietly across the high towers, softening the sharp edges of stone walls that had guarded the kingdom for centuries. Torches flickered along the battlements, their flames bending beneath an icy wind that carried the scent of pine and approaching storms. Deep below those towers, where sunlight had not reached for generations, Elara sat alone inside a narrow prison cell. A single torch burned beyond the iron bars. Its light stretched long shadows across the damp floor. Cold crept through the stone walls until even the air felt frozen. She pulled her cloak tighter around herself, but it offered little warmth. For the first time since her parents had died, she allowed tears to gather in her eyes. Not because she feared dying. Because she had no idea why any of this was happening. She had fed a starving animal. Nothing more. Yet somehow, An entire kingdom now believed she held the answer to its greatest mystery. She leaned her head against the cold wall and closed her eyes. The silence inside the dungeon was broken only by distant footsteps and the slow dripping of water somewhere beyond the darkness. Then, she heard breathing. Not human. Slow. Steady. Familiar. Her eyes opened. Outside the tiny window high above her cell, 2 golden lights glowed through the falling snow. Eyes. A wolf stood beyond the outer wall, too far away for anyone else to notice. It remained perfectly still. Watching. Waiting. Then another pair of eyes appeared. And another. Within moments, dozens of silent wolves surrounded the castle beyond the torchlight. No howls. No growls. Only quiet patience. As if they already knew morning would change everything. Elsewhere inside the castle, the atmosphere was far less peaceful. King Alderwyn stood before the great map of Alderwyn spread across an oak table. Once broad-shouldered and commanding, age had bent him slightly. Silver threaded through his beard. Long winters had left deep lines around thoughtful eyes. Yet even now there remained kindness in his face. Captain Rowan entered quietly. "My king." The old king looked up. "Any news?" "The wolves continue gathering." "How many?" "No one knows. They appear everywhere." The captain hesitated. "They never attack. They simply wait." King Alderwyn rested both hands upon the table. "They have never behaved this way." "No." Silence filled the chamber. Finally the king spoke. "Bring me the girl tomorrow." "Alive?" Captain Rowan nodded. "My lord. Lord Garrick requests permission to question her first." The king's expression hardened. "No. I know Garrick. He seeks confessions, not truth." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. The king slowly looked toward the dark northern horizon. "I fear we're running out of time." Lord Garrick was already making his own plans. In a chamber lit by dozens of candles, he stood surrounded by trusted officers. Maps covered the walls. Small carved figures marked troop movements across the kingdom. He placed one black figure directly upon Frostcrown Mountain. The king grows weak. He looked around the room. The people grow frightened. His officers listened carefully. And fear always seeks strength. One captain frowned. "My lord, what if the Guardian returns?" Garrick smiled. "Then we make certain he does not." He reached beneath the table and withdrew an ancient spear. Its black metal seemed to drink the candlelight instead of reflecting it. Strange runes curled along its shaft. Even standing near it made the room feel colder. This was forged before Alderwyn existed. One officer took an uneasy step backward. "The shadow spear." Garrick nodded. "The only weapon ever said to wound the Guardian." His fingers tightened around it. "If wolves protect the girl, then she will lead us straight to their king." Morning never truly arrived. Dark clouds swallowed the sun before dawn. Snow fell harder than anyone could remember. The wind howled through castle towers like grieving voices. Captain Rowan unlocked Elara's cell. "You'll come with me." She quietly stood. Her wrists remained bound, though more loosely than before. As they climbed toward the great hall, she noticed something strange. Servants whispered prayers. Guards glanced nervously toward every window. No one seemed focused on her anymore. Everyone watched the weather. The storm had become unnatural. Inside the throne room, King Alderwyn waited alone. Unlike the others, he dismissed every guard except Captain Rowan. For several moments he simply studied the young woman standing before him. She looked nothing like the dangerous prisoner described in frightened rumors. Her boots were worn. Her cloak had been carefully mended many times. Her hands carried tiny scars earned from years of honest work. "You are Elara?" "Yes, Your Majesty." His voice remained gentle. "Were you afraid when you met the wolf?" She blinked. "You know. The tracks told us enough." She lowered her eyes. "I was afraid." "Then why didn't you run?" A long silence followed. Finally she answered quietly. "He looked hungrier than I was." The old king said nothing, but something softened in his tired eyes. Before another question could be asked, the castle shook. A tremendous howl echoed across every stone wall. Not one wolf. Hundreds. The sound rolled over the capital like a living storm. Outside, soldiers shouted. Horns sounded. Captain Rowan rushed toward the window. "My king!" The wolves. From every forest surrounding Alderwyn, wolves poured across the snow. Grey, black, white, old, young. Large enough to rival horses. Small enough to slip silently through narrow streets. None attacked the terrified citizens. None entered homes. Instead, every pack moved toward the castle. Thousands of golden eyes looked upward. Not with hatred. With purpose. The city froze. Children peered through shutters. Merchants abandoned their carts. Church bells rang wildly. No one had ever seen wolves gather in such numbers. Captain Rowan tightened his sword. "They're surrounding us." King Aldrin slowly shook his head. "No. They're waiting." Then everything changed. A deafening crack echoed from somewhere beneath the earth. The floor trembled. Dust rained from the castle ceiling. Far away, toward Frost Crown Mountain, a pillar of black mist burst into the sky. It twisted upward like smoke from an endless fire. Even from miles away, people could feel its presence. Birds fell silent. The wind died. The air itself seemed heavy. Master Cedric stumbled into the throne room clutching the ancient manuscript. His face had turned pale. "The seal." He gasped. "It's breaking." Before anyone could react, the castle gates exploded inward. Not from attack. From force. A massive white wolf leaped through the shattered entrance. He moved with impossible speed. Royal guards raised their weapons. Yet none of them struck. The wolf ignored every soldier. His eyes found only one person. Elara. He crossed the great hall in 3 enormous strides. Then, he lowered himself before her. The chains around her wrists suddenly snapped apart. The broken iron fell onto the stone floor with a sharp clang. The wolf gently touched his nose against her hand. A warm pulse spread through her fingertips. The silver feathers she had collected began glowing inside the small pouch tied beneath her cloak. Captain Rowan stared in disbelief. The chains. No weapon touched them. The wolf turned, looking directly at King Aldrin. For one silent heartbeat, the old king bowed his head. Not to an animal. To an old friend. "Go," the king whispered. "Save him." The white wolf looked back at Elara, then toward the northern mountains. Without speaking a word, she understood. The journey into the mountains began beneath a sky filled with swirling snow. 5 wolves surrounded Elara as they crossed frozen rivers and climbed narrow trails hidden beneath towering cliffs. The white wolf led the way. The others watched every shadow. No birds sang. No deer wandered through the pines. Even the forest seemed to be holding its breath. Hours passed. The storm grew fiercer. Wind drove sharp ice across the mountains until breathing became difficult. More than once Elara slipped upon frozen stone. Each time one of the wolves quietly steadied her before she could fall. As night approached, they entered a valley unlike any place she had ever seen. Ancient pine trees formed a perfect circle around a crystal lake untouched by winter. Although snow covered every mountain beyond, green grass surrounded the water. Soft golden light shimmered beneath the surface. Warm air drifted upward carrying the scent of wildflowers that should not have bloomed in winter. The wolves stopped. Every one of them lowered its head. At the center of the lake stood an island connected by a narrow stone bridge. Ruins rested there. Not broken. Forgotten. Great white pillars wrapped in flowering vines reached toward the evening sky. Statues of wolves lined the pathway, their stone eyes seeming almost alive. The sanctuary. Older than Alderwyn. Older than every king whose name had been recorded in history. Elara crossed the bridge slowly. Every step filled her with a strange feeling she could not explain. It was as though she had walked this path before. In another lifetime. At the center of the sanctuary stood an enormous tree whose silver leaves glowed softly in the gathering darkness. Beneath its branches, someone waited. A tall man dressed in a long grey cloak stood with his back toward her. His silver hair moved gently in the mountain breeze. Broad shoulders rose and fell with slow, measured breaths. The wolves approached him without fear. One by one, they bowed their heads. He turned. Golden eyes met hers. The same eyes she had seen beneath the ancient oak. The same quiet sadness. The same impossible kindness. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, the stranger smiled with deep gratitude. It seems. His voice was calm, warm, and carried the quiet strength of someone who had lived through countless winters. We meet properly at last. Elara's breath caught. You. The words barely escaped her lips. You were the wolf. He inclined his head. Yes. I'm called Caelan. The first guardian. The Alpha King. As those words settled into the silent sanctuary, the wind itself seemed to pause. And far below the mountain, hidden within the storm, Lord Garrick's army had already begun climbing toward the sanctuary, with the shadow spear in his hands and war burning in his heart. The sanctuary stood in perfect silence. Snow continued to fall beyond the circle of ancient pines, yet not a single snowflake crossed into the sacred ground. Warm air drifted gently beneath the silver branches overhead, carrying the fragrance of blooming flowers that should have disappeared months before. Tiny streams of crystal water flowed between white stones polished smooth by centuries, their quiet music blending with the rustling leaves of the great tree at the sanctuary's heart. Elara remained motionless. Her heart beat so loudly she barely heard the water. The man before her looked no older than 30 winters. Yet there was something inside his eyes that no human could possess. They held endless dawns, countless winters, the memory of kingdoms that no longer existed. He stepped toward her with slow, careful movements, as though he feared even now that she might retreat. I frightened you that night. His voice was calm, carrying the same quiet strength she had somehow recognized beneath the ancient oak. Elara slowly shook her head. You looked alone. A faint smile touched his face. I was. He lowered his eyes for a moment. And very close to the end. Around them, every wolf rested quietly beneath the trees. Some lay beside the lake. Others watched the surrounding mountains. Not one made a sound. The sanctuary itself seemed to listen. Caelan walked toward the ancient silver tree. Its enormous trunk shimmered faintly beneath the fading light, and glowing veins of pale blue ran through its bark like living rivers. He rested one hand against it. The tree answered. A soft pulse of light spread through every branch. Thousands of silver leaves whispered together although no wind touched them. This tree remembers every guardian. Elara approached carefully. It remembers people. It remembers promises. His fingers remained upon the bark. Long before Alderwyn was built, before castles rose from these valleys, darkness walked freely across these mountains. As he spoke, faint images appeared within the glowing trunk. Not reflections. Memories. Elara watched towering forests burn beneath black skies. Villages swallowed by unnatural shadows. People fleeing through endless snow. Then she saw wolves. Hundreds of them. Standing beside frightened families instead of hunting them. They chose to protect us. Caelan nodded. They always have. The images changed. One enormous white wolf climbed alone toward Frostcrown Mountain. At the mountain's summit, darkness poured from a great crack in the earth like living smoke. The wolf stepped forward. Light burst from his body. The mountain shook. The shadows screamed. Then everything became still. The first guardian gave nearly all his life to imprison the darkness. Caelan's voice softened. Every guardian after him has renewed that prison. He turned toward Elara. Each century the seal weakens. So does the guardian. She finally understood. The hunger. He smiled sadly. I poured my own strength into the barrier. For many months I could no longer hunt. My body became weaker. My spirit faded. His eyes lifted toward the mountains beyond the sanctuary. I believed I would die before finding the one person the old oath had promised. Elara looked down. You mean me? I do. She frowned. But I'm no one. I've never done anything important. Caelan's expression warmed. You gave away the last meal you owned. You expected nothing. You didn't even know who I was. He stepped closer. That is exactly why the ancient oath chose you. Tears quietly filled Elara's eyes. No one had ever spoken of her kindness as though it mattered. To the villagers, she had simply been useful. To the kingdom, invisible. Yet standing before the Alpha King himself, she felt seen. As evening settled over the sanctuary, the wolves slowly gathered around the great tree. The oldest among them approached first. His muzzle had turned almost completely white with age. One by one, the others followed until hundreds formed a silent circle. Caelan closed his eyes. They remember. What? Every guardian. The old wolf stepped forward. He gently pressed his forehead against Caelan's shoulder. Another followed. Then another. No words passed between them. None were needed. Elara watched in silence. The bond between them was deeper than friendship. Deeper than family. It was loyalty carried across generations. She suddenly realized that while humans measured time through kings and kingdoms, the wolves measured it through guardians. A soft breeze carried silver leaves through the air. Several settled around Elara's feet. One rested upon her palm. The leaf glowed warmly before dissolving into tiny sparks of light. A peaceful warmth spread through her body. The aching cold that had followed her since childhood slowly faded. The long days of hunger. The endless loneliness. The grief she had carried since losing her parents. None disappeared completely, but they no longer felt quite so heavy. The sanctuary was healing wounds no one else could see. Far below the mountain, another gathering looked very different. Lord Garrick stood before nearly 500 soldiers. Torches burned despite the falling snow. Their orange light reflected from polished armor and sharpened blades. The shadow spear rested across Garrick's shoulders. Its dark metal seemed almost alive. The closer they climbed toward the sanctuary, the darker the spear became. One young captain finally gathered enough courage to speak. My lord. If the stories are true. What if the guardian cannot be killed? Garrick looked back without slowing. Everything dies. The difference is only how. The captain hesitated. And if the wolves attack? Garrick's smile returned. Then they'll watch their king fall. His army continued climbing. None noticed the glowing eyes silently watching them from every ridge. The wolves had known they were coming long before the soldiers left the castle. Back within the sanctuary, twilight slowly gave way to night. Stars appeared one by one above the mountains. The great silver tree shone brighter with every passing moment. Caelan led Elara toward a circle of ancient standing stones. At its center rested a pool as clear as polished glass. Its surface reflected not the sky, but another place entirely. Elara gasped softly. She saw her little cottage. The broken door. The scattered belongings. Then the image changed. Old Martha sat inside the village church praying quietly. Children huddled close to warm fires. Captain Rowan stood upon the castle wall staring toward the mountains. Finally, the water darkened. Frost Crown Mountain appeared. Beneath layers of stone, a vast prison stretched into endless darkness. Cracks spread slowly across walls carved from ancient light. Black mist escaped through each widening fracture. Within that darkness, something moved. Not quickly, patiently, waiting. Elara instinctively stepped back. What is it? Caelan's face became grave. The reason guardians exist. The image sharpened. She saw enormous claws scraping slowly across black stone. Two crimson eyes opened. Neither animal, nor human. Something much older. Its gaze lifted. It looked directly through the water. Straight at her. The pool exploded into ripples. Elara staggered backward, breathing hard. It saw me. Caelan nodded once. The prison weakens. If the seal breaks completely. He looked toward the kingdom below. There will be nowhere left to hide. For several quiet moments, neither spoke. The weight of that truth settled heavily between them. Finally Elara whispered, "What must we do?" Caelan looked toward the great tree. The ancient bond has awakened. But it is incomplete. He slowly removed a silver pendant hanging beneath his cloak. Within it rested a single crystal shaped like a wolf's eye. This belonged to the first guardian. He gently placed it in Elara's hands. It felt warm, alive. Our strength must join willingly. No force can create it. No command can demand it. Only trust. Before Elara could answer, a distant horn echoed through the mountains. Then another. The wolves instantly rose to their feet. Every ear turned toward the northern pass. The peaceful sanctuary changed in a heartbeat. The old wolves stepped before the younger ones. Several climbed surrounding cliffs. Others silently formed protective lines around the ancient tree. Caelan's expression hardened. They've arrived. The warm mountain breeze disappeared. In its place came smoke, iron, fire. Lord Garrick's army emerged between the snowy pines. Hundreds of torches lit the darkness. Rows of soldiers filled the narrow valley. At their center rode Garrick himself. The shadow spear rested upright in his hand. Even from across the valley, the weapon seemed to drink the sanctuary's light. He guided his horse forward until only the ancient bridge separated both sides. For a long moment, no one moved. Snow drifted silently between wolves and soldiers. Then Garrick laughed. "So?" His voice echoed across the valley. The bedtime stories were true after all. His eyes settled upon Caelan, the famous guardian. Then they shifted toward Elara. And the peasant girl. He smiled coldly. How disappointingly ordinary. The wolves answered with low growls that rolled across the sanctuary like distant thunder. Caelan stepped forward alone. "You still have time to leave." His voice remained calm. "No blood needs to be spilled tonight." Garrick's laughter only grew louder. "I didn't climb this mountain for peace." He slowly raised the shadow spear. Dark mist curled around its blade. "I came for your crown." The ancient wolves bared their teeth. The soldiers tightened their shields. The mountain itself seemed to stop breathing. And as the first cold wind swept across the sanctuary, Elara realized that the kindness which had brought her there would soon be tested more fiercely than ever before. The valley fell into a silence so complete that even the falling snow seemed afraid to touch the earth. On one side stood hundreds of soldiers wrapped in polished steel, their spears pointed toward the sanctuary. On the other stood wolves. No banners. No armor. No shouted commands. Only watchful eyes that reflected the pale winter moon. The ancient bridge between them suddenly felt like the narrow line separating two very different worlds. Lord Garrick slowly urged his horse forward until its hooves stopped at the edge of the bridge. The shadow spear rested comfortably in his hand. Dark mist curled lazily around its blade, twisting through the cold air like living smoke. "You've hidden long enough," Garrick called. "Step aside, Guardian, and I may spare the wolves." Caelan remained perfectly still beneath the silver tree. His grey cloak stirred gently in the mountain wind. "You have never come seeking peace." "No. You came seeking power." Garrick smiled. "And power has always belonged to those willing to take it." His horse pawed at the frozen stone. The soldiers behind him lowered their shields in perfect formation. Rows of archers stepped forward. Bowstrings tightened. Steel glimmered beneath the moonlight. Elara looked across their faces. Most of the soldiers were afraid. She saw it in trembling hands. In restless eyes. In the way several men avoided looking at the wolves waiting silently across the bridge. These were not cruel men. Many were fathers. Brothers. Farmers who had become soldiers because the kingdom had called. They believed they were protecting Alderwyn. They simply did not know who the true enemy was. Garrick raised one hand. "Advance." The first line of soldiers marched onto the bridge. Their boots echoed against ancient stone. Shield touched shield. Spear touched spear. The wolves did not move. One more step. Another. Another. The tension tightened until even breathing became difficult. Then, a young soldier slipped. Ice beneath his boot gave way. He fell hard against the bridge, his helmet tumbling into the frozen stream below. His spear slid from his hands. Before anyone could react, one of the largest wolves bounded forward. The soldiers shouted. Several raised their weapons. But the wolf did something no one expected. Instead of attacking, he gently picked up the fallen spear in his jaws, walked toward the frightened young man, and laid it quietly beside him. The wolf stepped back. The soldier stared in disbelief. His hands shook as he picked up the weapon. He slowly looked into the wolf's golden eyes. There was no hatred there, only warning, only restraint. The young man's sword lowered. Others noticed. The neat formation began to waver. Confusion spread through Garrick's army. "What are they doing?" one captain whispered. "They could have killed him." But they didn't. Lord Garrick's face darkened. Enough. He lifted the shadow spear high into the air. Darkness exploded from its blade. Black lightning raced across the sky. The warm glow surrounding the sanctuary flickered violently. The silver leaves above Caelan trembled. A deep crack echoed through the valley. Far beneath the mountain, the ancient prison answered. The earth shook. Snow cascaded from towering cliffs. Birds burst screaming from distant trees. The seal had weakened again. Caelan closed his eyes for a single heartbeat. Pain crossed his face. His strength had not fully returned. The years spent feeding his own life into the ancient barrier had left wounds no ordinary healing could erase. Even now, every tremor beneath the mountain stole another piece of his remaining strength. Elara saw him stagger. Only slightly. But she saw it. Without thinking, she reached out and caught his arm before he could lose his balance. The moment her hand touched him, warm light spread beneath their feet. The silver pendant resting against her chest glowed brightly. The sanctuary answered. Thousands of silver leaves lifted into the air. The wolves raised their heads together. A low, peaceful howl rolled across the valley. Not a battle cry. A promise. Strength flowed through the bond between them. Color slowly returned to Caelan's face. His breathing steadied. His golden eyes shone brighter than before. He looked down at Elara. "You've completed the bond." "I didn't know how." "You already did." He smiled gently. "You chose to help before thinking of yourself." Fury twisted Garrick's expression. "No." He hurled the shadow spear. The weapon screamed through the air. Darkness followed behind it like a storm. It flew straight toward Caelan. Time seemed to slow. Elara moved without hesitation. She stepped directly into its path. Caelan reached for her. The wolves leaped forward. Everything happened in a single heartbeat. The silver pendant burst into brilliant light. The shadow spear struck that light. And stopped. It hovered only inches from Elara's heart. Darkness and silver radiance collided. The valley exploded with blinding light. A wave of energy swept across the mountains. Snow rose into the air. Ancient trees bent beneath invisible force. The bridge cracked beneath the pressure. When the light faded, the shadow spear had changed. Its black surface shattered. Piece by piece. The ancient runes faded. Dark mist escaped one final time before dissolving into the cold wind. The weapon that had carried centuries of hatred crumbled into harmless dust. Silence returned. Lord Garrick stared at his empty hands. Impossible. His greatest weapon. Gone. The mountain answered with another violent tremor. This one far stronger than the last. The frozen ground split apart. A massive crack opened behind Garrick's army. Black smoke poured upward. Then came a sound unlike anything human ears were meant to hear. Not a roar. Not a scream. Something between both. Ancient. Endless. Hungry. The darkness had found its opening. Soldiers abandoned formation. Some dropped their weapons. Others stumbled backward in terror. The black mist reached toward them like countless grasping hands. Where it touched the snow, the white ground turned gray. Flowers beneath the sanctuary began closing. Even the wolves stepped back. Not from fear. From respect. They understood what was awakening. Caelan looked toward the widening crack. If it reaches the valley, there will be nothing left. Elara followed his gaze. Within the darkness she saw countless faces. Not living people. Echoes. The grief, hatred, greed, and cruelty gathered across centuries. The prison had never held a monster of flesh. It had imprisoned every darkness that people had allowed to grow inside their own hearts. That darkness had taken shape. Now it wanted the world again. Caelan stepped toward the opening. I must seal it. You'll die. He looked at her quietly. That has always been the Guardian's duty. The wolves lowered their heads. They knew. Every Guardian eventually gave everything. It had always ended that way. Elara's eyes filled with tears. There has to be another way. There isn't. She remembered the ancient words Master Cedric had read. Only compassion freely given. Only a willing heart. Not sacrifice born from despair, but mercy born from love. Suddenly, she understood. She turned. Lord Garrick had fallen beside the broken bridge. His armor was cracked. His sword lay beyond reach. The black mist crept steadily toward him. The proud commander who had dreamed of ruling the kingdom now looked terrified. His eyes met hers. For the first time. There was no arrogance. Only fear. Help me. His voice broke. Please. The wolves watched silently. The soldiers watched silently. Everyone expected Elara to leave him. After everything he had done, he deserved the darkness. It would have been justice. Her hands trembled. She remembered her parents. Old Martha. The hungry wolf beneath the ancient oak. Kindness had never depended upon whether someone deserved it. It depended upon the heart of the one who offered it. Elara ran. She reached Garrick just as the black mist wrapped around his legs. Ignoring the icy pain, she seized his arm with both hands. Hold on. The darkness fought to pull him away. Snow melted beneath her knees. The silver pendant blazed brighter than the sun. Caelan understood. His eyes widened. The oath. The ancient wolves lifted their voices. Hundreds. Then thousands. Their howls filled every mountain. The silver tree burst into radiant light. Its roots spread beneath the valley like rivers of stars. Light surrounded Elara. And Garrick. Not because he deserved saving. Because mercy had been chosen over revenge. The ancient oath was complete. The darkness screamed. The sound shook every mountain peak. Cracks raced across the prison walls. Then, instead of breaking apart, they began healing. Stone closed. Light returned. The black mist twisted violently before collapsing inward. The crimson eyes disappeared. Silence. Perfect silence. The mountain stood still once more. Winter itself seemed to exhale. Morning arrived slowly. Golden sunlight spilled across the snowy peaks. For the first time in many weeks. The storm clouds were gone. Birdsong drifted through the valley. The frozen lake reflected a clear blue sky. The sanctuary glowed softly beneath the warmth of a new day. The soldiers quietly laid down their weapons. One after another. Captain Rowan removed his helmet and knelt before King Aldrin when the old king arrived with the royal guard later that afternoon. The kingdom is safe. King Aldrin looked toward Elara. No. He smiled gently. She kept it safe. The old king walked to her and bowed his head. Not as a ruler. As a grateful man. Soon every soldier followed. Then the villagers. Even those who had once doubted her lowered their heads with quiet respect. Old Martha wrapped trembling arms around Elara, unable to stop crying. I always knew your heart was too big for this little village. Elara laughed through tears. So did my mother. Lord Garrick survived. His wounds healed slowly, but something inside him had changed forever. The woman he had tried to destroy had been the one to save his life. He expected chains. Execution. Instead, King Aldrin stripped him of his rank, his lands, and every title he had ever held. You will spend the rest of your life rebuilding the villages damaged by your ambition. Gerrick lowered his head. For the first time in many years. He offered no argument. Days later, spring arrived much earlier than anyone believed possible. Snow melted into laughing streams. Wildflowers pushed through the thawing earth. Children once again filled village roads with laughter. The wolves gradually disappeared into the forests. Not because they were leaving forever. Because balance had returned. On the final evening before they departed, Elara climbed once more to the ancient sanctuary. Caelan waited beneath the silver tree. The setting sun painted the mountains gold. For a while they simply watched the wind move through the branches. "You'll leave too," she said softly. He nodded. "The guardian belongs where he is needed." She smiled, though tears shimmered in her eyes. "And where is that?" He looked toward the endless forests. "Everywhere." He gently took her hand. "Whenever kindness is chosen over fear. Whenever hope is stronger than hatred. The oath lives on." He released her hand. The wolves gathered quietly behind him. One by one they disappeared into the forest. Caelan was the last to leave. Halfway between the trees, he stopped. For a single moment. The man was gone. In his place stood the great silver-grey wolf she had fed beneath the ancient oak. His golden eyes met hers one last time. He lowered his great head in the same silent gesture of gratitude. Then he turned and vanished into the whispering pines. Years passed. Kingdoms changed. Children became grandparents. Old stories slowly transformed into legends. Travelers crossing Alderwyn often stopped beside a small cottage at the edge of whispering forest. There, an elderly woman welcomed strangers with warm bread, fresh tea, and a gentle smile that never faded with age. Some evenings, just as the sun slipped behind the mountains, wolves could be seen standing quietly along the distant tree line. They never crossed into the village. They never frightened anyone. They simply watched the little cottage for a while before disappearing into the forest once again. The people smiled whenever they saw them. Because they remembered. Not the battles. Not the fear. But the truth that had saved them all. That the greatest strength in any kingdom was never found in swords, crowns, or armies. It was found in a simple act of kindness offered with no expectation of reward. And somewhere deep within the endless whispering forest, whenever moonlight touched the ancient pines, a great silver wolf still walked beneath the stars, guarding not only the kingdom of Alderwyn, but the quiet hope that as long as one compassionate heart remained in the world, the darkness would never truly win. The end.